Again then guys, and welcome to episode 29 of Import Nights, the review series for the JDM cars of GranTurismo, a very popular category. And within this category, there are kind of two different approaches to performance. You've got the vehicles which go for just sheer power and straight line ability, usually with a good mix of handling, but not necessarily the best. I would say that includes stuff like your Fairladies, your Skylines to some degree, your Supras, your Mitsubishi 3000 GTs and GTOs, that kind of thing. They can be good around the track, but they are outstandingly good, particularly in a straight line. Then you have the other approach, stuff like Silvias, Integras, Evos, Imprezas, the cars which have a much more track-focused approach and don't have as much power or straight line performance, but make up for it with lower weight, high grip, nimble, compact layouts, and just great handling. And that handling and low weight allows them to have a really high average speed and to flow through the corners in initial D-style racing, and that can also allow them to sometimes even be quicker than other JDM cars or performance cars in general, even non-Japanese ones, with significantly more power. Now overall, I would say that the Silvia or the S chassis vehicles in general, with only a couple of exceptions, is a great example of that approach. They don't have as much power as Fairladies, as Skylines, but even though they don't have that kind of sheer power, they're so light in a similar way to vehicles like the Toyota Sprinter or the Honda Integra, vehicles like that, that they just have incredible trackability. Now this version is of course a more old school Silvia, the S13, a very popular car for JDM fans, probably most popular for drifting more than anything else, but also great as a track car and also quicker in a straight line than its raw numbers would suggest. So the question overall about this car boils down to two primary things. One, of course, what you get for the money, what kind of potential does it have, but also how good is it compared to the other options of S chassis vehicle. Well, first of all, consider what you get. For the price of just over 22 grand, which for a start is pretty good, you get a 1.8 litre turbo engine, so slightly smaller than the newer ones, 461 horsepower, which probably isn't too surprising. That's the kind of power that most S chassis vehicles tend to hover around, between 460 and 560 horsepower generally. You're looking at 345 foot-pounds of torque, which is pretty good for the engine size, and notably, probably more notably in fact than the power and torque, is the weight. 954 kilos is very impressive, especially given the fact that the Silvia in general, but specifically this one, is not a small car. This is a decent sized vehicle. And when you combine that impressive weight, and it really is impressive, with the modest power, the horsepower per tonne resulting from that is actually as impressive as vehicles which you typically expect to have a much higher power that they're working with. Not just Japanese cars, but say American cars or European cars, something like a higher end hot hatch or even a much more powerful sports coupe, because although those vehicles may sometimes have more power than this car has, they also have more weight. So the horsepower per tonne, although good, is actually only as good as this car in many cases, because although this has less power, it's got so much less weight than many of those rivals that it ends up being just as good, because of the fact that this car has, yes, less power, but also so much less weight to deal with. Now the PP on this car I would say is reasonably good, 531 in fully tuned form, certainly isn't ridiculous. This car can be competitive, I would say even up to that level under the right circumstances, and although in a straight line it's not necessarily quite as quick as for instance something like an S15, the top-end performance doesn't fall too far behind the other Silvias, newer and older, but the acceleration in particular is where you will notice a difference, because the newer cars do tend to have more power. Also, especially when you go beyond S chassis vehicles, when you start getting up into your 200SXs, your 240SXs, you will start to notice a difference, of course, in straight line performance. But that's not really the point of this car. In order to get the best out of the S13, you need to use it under the right circumstances, and that really goes for any car. In the case of this vehicle, though, I would say the best circumstances to get the full range of this car's ability are twisty roads, and fans of JDM cars will already know that. This is a great car for twisty circuits, for drifting, for driver control, driver feedback, and it's also very easy to drive. The fact that, yes, it's a decent sized vehicle, but with a relatively modest amount of power to deal with, and very low weight, means that it doesn't really feel like a handful, even though a car with similar performance that's non-Japanese would typically have a lot more power to get to a similar performance level. So you'd feel like you were working with a lot more car, and as such, it could be less beginner friendly. That's not the case with these. Now, I'm not saying that it's perfect for beginners, but the beginner friendliness is, I would say, good on the S13, and the Silvias in general, but this is a good example of that. Now, overall, Silvia fans are probably going to buy every incarnation of the Silvia anyway, maybe even every version in the game, but for those who perhaps aren't super fans, don't have that kind of garage space set aside just to buy so many versions of one car, maybe you don't particularly want to own all the Silvias, you just want to get a good one to get the benefits that they have. Well, in that case, which one should you go for? Well, of course, to some degree it depends on what you want. All of the Silvias have similar traits to a more or lesser degree, but at the same time they each have their own distinct personality. The S13 in this particular case has a much more back to basics, old school kind of approach. So if that sounds like it appeals to you, definitely check it out. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.